Tensions explode in court as Pooh Shiesty directly confronts Gucci Mane over explosive snitching allegations. What was once a solid alliance under 1017 has unraveled into a public clash filled with accusations, betrayal, and high-stakes drama, which is now spiraling further as Shai calls out names and pulls others into the chaos, changing everything. The feds dropped the hammer. On April 2nd, 2026, the United States Department of Justice walked up to a podium in Dallas, Texas, and said something that stopped the entire hip-hop world cold. 9 people, including one of the most anticipated comeback artists in recent memory, had been charged with federal kidnapping and armed robbery. And the victim at the center of it all was one of the most legendary names in trap music history. This was not a rumor.
This was not a blog post.
This was the federal government of the United States with a criminal complaint, a press conference, and a mountain of evidence that included ankle monitor data, surveillance footage, fingerprint analysis, rental car records, Greyhound bus tickets, and social media posts where the suspects allegedly flexed stolen jewelry the very next day. The name at the top of that complaint was Lantrell Williams Jr. The world knows him as Pooh Shiesty. And the man he allegedly held at gunpoint, the man he allegedly forced to sign a record contract release while an AK-style pistol was pointed at his face, was his own label boss, his mentor, the man who signed him, supported him through federal prison, and kept him on the roster when everybody else got dropped. Gucci Mane. This is the story of how that happened. And it starts not with a diss track, not with a Twitter beef, not with a subliminal verse. It starts in a federal courtroom with charges that could put Pooh Shiesty way away for the rest of his life. On April 2nd, 2026, U.S. Attorney Ryan Ray Bell stood before cameras in the Northern District of Texas and announced the arrests of 9 individuals, including Pooh Shiesty, his father, Lantrell Williams Sr., and fellow Memphis rapper Big 30, born Rodney Wright Jr.
This week, 9 individuals, including well-known musical artists, kidnapped and robbed at gunpoint numerous victims at a music studio in Dallas, Texas.
9 individuals kidnapped and robbed at gunpoint at a music studio. The U.S. attorney then laid out exactly what the government says happened. And when you hear it all at once, the audacity of what is being alleged is almost difficult to process.
As alleged, Williams Jr. produced an AK-style pistol and forced one of the victims to sign a release from the recording contract at gunpoint.
After the remaining conspirators displayed he pulled an AK-style pistol on his own label boss to get out of a record deal. And then, as if that was not enough, the U.S. attorney kept going, because there was more.
The remaining conspirators displayed firearms and robbed the other victims of Rolex watches, jewelry, cash, and other high-value items.
Rolex watches, jewelry, cash, multiple firearms, multiple victims. This was not a spontaneous argument that got out of hand. According to federal prosecutors, this was a coordinated, pre-planned armed takeover of a recording studio. And then came the detail that made the entire hip-hop internet lose its mind.
Electronic monitoring data placing Williams Jr. at the offense location, which would put him in violation of his home detention conditions.
He had an ankle monitor on his leg. He was on home confinement from his previous federal sentence, and the government's own monitoring data placed him at the exact location of the crime. DJ Academics, when he was reading through the criminal complaint live, had a reaction that summed up how the entire internet felt. He went to commit a federal kidnapping with a government-issued GPS tracker strapped to his ankle, broadcasting his location in real time. Now, let's talk about what these men are actually facing, because the legal weight of the situation is staggering. The charges filed against all 9 defendants include federal kidnapping under 18 U.S.C. paragraph 11201 and conspiracy to commit kidnapping along with Hobbs Act armed robbery. These are not state charges. These are federal charges, which means harsher sentencing guidelines, federal prisons, and a prosecution machine that does not lose often. When a reporter at the press conference asked what kind of time these defendants were looking at, the U.S. attorney gave an answer that should put everything in perspective.
So there's no mandatory minimum in this case. It's a range of punishment, and it'll be in the province of the judge, whoever gets the case. But it could be from 0 all the way to life imprisonment.
0 to life. That is the range. And it gets worse for Shai Wise specifically, because he was not just a free man who made a bad decision. He was on home confinement at the time of the alleged offense, serving the tail end of a 63-month federal sentence for a prior firearms conspiracy charge out of the Southern District of Florida. Committing a new federal offense while on supervised release is what prosecutors call an aggravating factor. In plain English, it makes the sentencing worse. 8 of the 9 suspects were arrested on April 1, 2026 across Dallas, Memphis, and Nashville. One suspect remained at large at the time of the press conference, with agents actively working to locate them. The FBI's Dallas Violent Crimes Task Force coordinated with field offices in Memphis, Nashville, Little Rock, Birmingham, and Atlanta to pull off simultaneous arrests across multiple jurisdictions. This was not a small operation. This was a multi-state federal manhunt that had been building quietly since January. Here is something important that most of the conversation online has glossed over. This incident happened on January 10th, 2026. The arrests came on April 1st. That is nearly 3 months between the alleged crime and the charges being unsealed. A reporter at the press conference asked directly, why did it take so long?
That was one of the reasons I wanted to list off some of the evidence that has been uncovered to date. A lot of this was subpoena work, search warrant work, and things like that in order to develop the investigation.
Subpoenas, search warrants, cell phone records, rental car data, ankle monitor logs, fingerprints from red Solo cups at the crime scene, Greyhound bus ticket records, social media forensics, surveillance footage pulled from multiple cameras at multiple locations. The feds were not sleeping, they were building. And by the time they walked into that press conference, the charging document outlined evidence including ankle monitor data, cell phone records, license plate reader data, rental car records, surveillance footage, fingerprint evidence from the crime scene, social media posts showing stolen property, and Greyhound bus records confirming travel from Dallas back to Memphis the day after the offense. They had everything, and they waited until they had all of it before they moved. Now, here is where the story takes the turn that the internet could not stop talking about. Gucci Mane was not arrested. Gucci Mane was not charged. Gucci Mane was identified in the federal complaint as a victim referred to throughout the document by his initials RD for Roderick Davis, his legal name. But the moment that became public knowledge, a significant portion of the hip-hop internet pivoted from free Pooh Shiesty to something else entirely, because buried in the language of the federal complaint was a detail that the streets immediately zeroed in on. The complaint noted that the victims, including Gucci Mane, helped authorities identify the suspects through descriptions, social media account identifications, and photo lineups. In hip-hop culture, that sentence has one meaning, and that meaning traveled across every group chat, every comment section, and every YouTube reaction video within hours of the complaint dropping. But here is the context that the outrage skipped over. There was an undercover law enforcement officer present at the studio that day identified in the complaint as CW, who was working as Gucci's head of security. The police were already there. The FBI already had surveillance footage. They already had the ankle monitor data. They already is Cub. They already had rental car records, and license plate already had the ankle had fingerprints from the Solo cups. They already had rental car records and license plate readers and cell phone towers pinging from Memphis to Dallas. Gucci Mane identifying someone from an Instagram account did not build this case. The case was already built. Academics reading through the complaint live acknowledged the point directly, noting that the undercover cop's presence meant investigators already had an inside view, and that the 3 people who could speak to what happened inside that recording room were the cameraman, Gucci's associate, and Gucci himself. But none of that stopped Gucci from going live and addressing it head-on. Before we get there, you need to understand how Pushy Y and Gucci Mane got here in the first place. Because the relationship that allegedly ended at gunpoint in a Dallas recording studio started as one of the most celebrated mentor-protega partnerships in modern rap. And understanding how it fell apart is the only way any of this makes sense. From mentor to victim. To understand January 10th, 2026, you have to go back to June 2020. Because 6 years before Pushy Y allegedly put an AK-style pistol in Gucci Mane's face and forced him to sign release papers, Gucci Mane put a pen in Pushy Y's hand and gave him the biggest opportunity of his life. Gucci Mane signed Pushy Y to 1017 Records, a joint venture with Atlantic Records. Around June 2020, after Shiesty Y built buzz with independent tracks like Hell Night and Back in Blood, Shiesty Y was raw.
He was young.
He was from Memphis, and Gucci saw something in him that he believed was worth betting on. This was not just a check and a contract. Gucci gifted Shaw Y a Trackhawk truck early in the relationship. Their dynamic was publicly framed as a passing of the torch. One generation of trap royalty handing the flame to the next. They made music together. They performed together. They collaborated on tracks like Still Together and appeared on Gucci's So Icy Summer compilation together. And when Shy Y's debut mixtape, Shy Y Season, dropped in February 2021, it hit number 4 on the Billboard 200.
Gucci was on the project.
Gucci was celebrating it. For all the world could see, this was exactly what it was supposed to be. But the streets were already pulling at Shy from both directions. Before Shy ever walked into that Dallas studio in January 2026, he had already been through the federal system once. And the pattern from that first case tells you almost everything you need to know about how this second one happened. In October 2020, the same year he signed with Gucci, Shy was involved in a violent confrontation at the Landon Hotel in Bay Harbor Islands, Florida. 2 victims were shot during what prosecutors described as a deal gone wrong involving marijuana, liquid codeine, and high-end sneakers. Both survived, but the federal case that followed did not disappear. The DOJ later outlined that the firearms conspiracy, Shiesty pleaded to cover 3 separate incidents: a July 2020 shooting at a Memphis gas station, the October 2020 Florida hotel incident, and a May 2021 assault with a firearm at the King of Diamonds strip club in Miami. In January 2022, Shy pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiring to possess firearms in furtherance of crimes of violence and drug trafficking. 3 other charges were dropped in the deal, including one that could have carried a potential life sentence. He was sentenced to 63 months in federal prison. And through all of it, through the arrest, the indictment, the plea, the sentencing, Gucci Mane kept the deal alive. He kept Shy on the 1017 roster and continued releasing music featuring him while he was incarcerated, including Shy Season, certified in 2022. That is not nothing. That is a label boss going to bat for an artist who just caught a federal gun charge. That is loyalty. Or, at least that is what loyalty looks like on the surface. While Shiesty was away, something happened that many believe shifted the entire emotional temperature of his relationship with Gucci Mane. And it had nothing to do with royalty rates or contract clauses. Shiesty's cousin Big Scar, born Alexander Woods, also signed to 1017 Records, died in 2023. He was young. The loss was devastating for Shy's family and for the Memphis rap community. And what followed, according to multiple reports and street accounts, was a rupture. Reports suggest Big Scar's family felt Gucci did not provide enough support around the funeral. Further allegations emerged that Gucci had asked for jewelry and chains back from Scar's relatives after his death. Some sources cite this moment specifically as a key grievance that Pooh Shiesty and his associates, including Big 30, carried into every conversation about the label from that point forward. Whether every specific detail of that account is accurate is difficult to confirm from the outside, but the feeling it created that the mentor-protege bond had limits. That when things got personal, Gucci's loyalty had a ceiling, appears to have been very real inside Shy's camp. He was sitting in a federal prison, grieving his cousin, watching how his family was being treated, and waiting for the day he could come home and renegotiate his future. In October 2024, Gucci Mane dropped most of his 1017 artists for what he publicly described as profit and loss reasons, citing losses on the roster. Most artists got cut, but not Shy. Gucci kept him. He kept Fujiano, too, but Shy was the marquee name, the one Gucci was still betting on. From the outside, that looks like an act of faith. Gucci could have cut him. He didn't. He was still in his corner, but Shy was released from federal prison early in October 2025, placed on home detention with an ankle monitor as part of the conditions of his release. His original contract had expired or was due for renegotiation, and the numbers Gucci put on the table, according to insider reports and the framing of the federal complaint itself, were not what Shiesty was expecting. He had a number 4 Billboard album. He had just dropped FDO, and the internet responded immediately. He had real leverage, and reports indicated that rival label CMG run by Yodi, who has long-standing beef with Gucci Mane, was showing interest in Shy. That is a dangerous combination: an artist who feels undervalued, a rival who is circling, and a label boss who is not budging. The FBI affidavit states plainly, Williams Jr. was upset with the terms of his contract and wished to be released from his contractual obligations. That is the motive. That is what the government says drove everything that happened on January 10th. Not disrespect in a song, not a public disc. A business dispute over a renegotiation that Shy felt was unfair and that he allegedly decided to resolve not with a lawyer, but with an AK-style pistol and a stack of pre-printed release papers he had ready to go. And the saddest part of all of it, he had just been on camera saying Gucci was his blueprint. In his XXL interview after his release, Shiesty talked about what Gucci meant to him, about watching how Gucci came home from prison and transformed, about taking notes. He said in his own words that Gucci told him, "You are 20 years old going through what I went through at 35. You have a head start." He called Gucci his motivation. He said it stuck with him. It didn't stick long enough. Inside the studio, January 10th, 2026, Dallas, Texas. a recording studio inside an office building off Dallas Parkway. Everything that follows comes directly from the federal criminal complaint filed by FBI Special Agent Brittany Garcia in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas. This is the government's account. These are the facts they have put in front of a federal judge and said, this is what happened. Gucci Mane, referred to in the complaint as RD for Rodri Davis, flew into Dallas around 1 p.m. alongside his cameraman, his associate, and 2 security personnel, including one individual identified as CW, his head of security, who was an undercover law enforcement officer. He was there for a business meeting contract talk. He expected a conversation. The studio was still closed when they arrived around 1:45 p.m. So, the group went to a nearby liquor store, bought bottles and plastic red cups, and came back to wait. Meanwhile, Shy Y's father, Lantrell Williams, Sr., was making calls. He called the studio owner multiple times that afternoon, eventually reaching him around 2:53 p.m. and booking a session for that afternoon, allegedly, so that Shy Y and Gucci could record music together. The studio owner did not know what was coming. He just thought he was opening up for a session. The studio opened around 3:15 p.m. Gucci, his cameraman, his associate, and his security settled in. They put on a football game and started pouring drinks into those red Solo cups. And then at approximately 3:43 p.m., Shy Y and his 8 co-conspirators entered the building. Surveillance footage showed one individual leaving briefly and returning with a bag slung over his shoulder. That bag is the center of everything that happens next. But before that bag gets opened, something else happens. Something that when you read it, knowing what follows, makes the whole thing feel almost cinematic in the worst possible way. Shiesty Y asked to speak with Gucci privately. He suggested they go into the recording room, the actual booth, to have a one-on-one conversation away from everyone else. Gucci agreed. He walked into that room. He was not alone. Shy Y's father and Big 30 walked in with them, 3 against 1. While back in the control room, Gucci's cameraman and associate were now sitting with 6 of Shy Y's people. This was not a conversation. This was a trap. And once everybody was in position, it was sprung. Inside the recording room, Shy Y pulled contract termination and release paperwork from a bag and told Gucci to sign it. He had printed it beforehand. The complaint later notes that surveillance footage from a nearby Staples store shows Shy Y's father entering the copy and print area earlier that same day, with receipt records confirming a transaction at the printer during that time. They printed those papers before they ever walked into that studio. Gucci looked at the paperwork and said no. When Gucci declined to sign, Shy Y became agitated and the two began to argue. The cameraman and associate in the control room could see through the glass that the conversation was getting heated, and then Shy Y made a call. He told Big 30 to go get the bag. Big 30 left the recording room, retrieved the bag, came back, and Shy Y pulled out what appeared to be a black AK-style pistol and pointed it directly at Gucci Mane. Sign the papers.
Gucci signed.
While Big 30 stood by, one co-defendant recorded video of Gucci verbally stating that he was releasing Shy from the contract. Then Shy WY's father looked at the paperwork and said it needed to be dated. Shy then forced Gucci to add a date next to his signature. After the paperwork was signed, Shy Y allegedly took Gucci's wedding ring, watch, earrings, and cash. While all of that was happening in the recording booth, the situation in the control room had turned just as violent. The remaining members of Shy Y's crew produced handguns and began demanding property from Gucci's cameraman and associate. One victim was choked from behind to the point of near unconsciousness, resulting in visible abrasions on his neck and wrist. Rolex watches, a Louis Vuitton bag containing high-dollar watches, Apple AirPods, wallets, and a chain bearing the 1017 moniker were stolen at gunpoint. Big 30 positioned himself at the studio door and barricaded it with his body, preventing anyone from escaping. The undercover security officer in the lobby, the one with law enforcement training, tried to get through the door with his partner. They managed to partially open it, looked inside, saw that the suspects were armed and outnumbered them, and pulled back. One of Shy WY's crew members reportedly wanted to open fire. According to the complaint, Shiesty Y told him directly, "Don't shoot." When the group finally exited, Gucci instructed his bodyguards to escort the victims to their vehicle. The suspects left through a separate entrance and dispersed. What happened after they walked out is almost as staggering as what happened inside. Within hours, several of the defendants were on social media posting videos and photos that appeared to show the stolen Rolex watches and jewelry. They were flexing the evidence in real time on their public accounts with their names attached. The stolen Louis Vuitton bag had an air tag inside it. Investigators were able to track its last recorded location to the Dallas area using the air tag data provided by the victim. Fingerprints lifted from the red Solo cups at the crime scene were run through the FBI's fingerprint database and matched to 2 of the defendants. The same cups they drank out of casually while waiting for Gucci to arrive. Shy Y's father had rented the Buick Enclave used by the group. Investigators subpoenaed hers, who responded the same day and confirmed the rental, and then provided GPS data from the vehicle that corroborated the license plate readers tracking it from the crime scene. Cell phone records for Shiesty Y, his father, Big 30, and others showed they all traveled together from Memphis to Dallas, leaving Memphis on January 8th and arriving early morning on January 9th, a 6-hour drive in a convoy with a plan already printed. The day after the incident, several of the crew boarded a Greyhound bus from Dallas back to Memphis. Records from Greyhound confirmed their travel. Others traveled by vehicle. One of those vehicles, the Dodge Charger Hellcat registered to Shy Y's father, was reported stolen from a Dallas hotel the morning of January 11th. And Shy Y's ankle monitor, the location data from his electronic monitoring device placed him at the exact location of the offense at the exact time the crime was committed. The government did not need a witness to tell them he was there. His own court-ordered GPS device told them. When the arrests went public on April 2nd, the conversation immediately split in 2 directions online. Half the internet was focused on Pooh Shiesty. The other half turned their attention to Gucci Mane and the question that hip-hop culture always asks first in situations like this. Did he tell? Gucci went live on Instagram, and he came with his chest out. He stated he does not play police games. He said he handles things in the streets, not with law enforcement. He posted photos of his jewelry. He issued veiled warnings, including the phrase, that you won't see the end of this year. His supporters, including figures close to him, pushed back hard on the snitching narrative, arguing that Gucci was a victim and that the mountain of independent evidence the feds had built made the point moot. Regardless, the street argument against the snitch label is straightforward. The government had ankle monitor data, an undercover law enforcement officer on the scene, surveillance cameras, license plate readers, GPS from rental cars, fingerprints, air tag data, social media forensics, and bus ticket records. Gucci identifying someone from an Instagram photo did not build this case. The case was built before anyone picked up a phone to call a lawyer, but nuance does not travel as fast as a screenshot, and the debate is still running. What is not debatable is the legal reality of where Pooh Shie now stands. The forced contract release, the whole reason any of this allegedly happened, is almost certainly legally invalid. Standard contract law avoids any agreement signed under threat of violence. Duress nullifies consent. Shiesty Way doesn't get out of the contract this way. He just gets more prison time. He came out of federal prison after 3 years. He dropped a song that went everywhere. He had shows lined up at $150,000 to $200,000 a night. He had the industry's attention. He had the streets behind him. He had everything you could want coming out of a bid. And he threw it all away. Not for money, not for power, for a piece of paper signed at gunpoint that will never hold up in court. The case is active. No trial date has been set. All defendants are presumed innocent until proven guilty. But the evidence the federal government has already made public is extensive. And for a man who is already on federal supervised release, the road ahead is as serious as it gets. Pooh Shiesty had the world in his hands, and this is what he did with it. Found this information exciting and unbelievable. Be sure to check out other similar and amazing videos on the screen. Thanks again for watching.